In many universities, there's a tradition that an esteemed or an eminent professor at the end of her or his career is asked to deliver a last lecture, a kind of summation of a lifetime of academic thought. I taught at the University of British Columbia for 39 years. Nobody ever asked me to give a final lecture. But when I was asked to become involved in a feature film for theaters, it was decided that we would give a last lecture, and that would become a part of the film. So that's what I did in December of last year. I'm going to be 75 in March, and when you get to be this age, you know that you're at the last part of your life. I say that I'm in what I call the death zone. There's nothing morbid about that. We're all going to die. I'm sorry every one of you is going to die. It's a reality. But I think as an elder, we have an obligation now to get on with the most important part of our lives. You see, I believe it's our duty as elders to reflect back over a life, to try to sift through experiences and observations and thoughts, to distill a legacy, something to pass on to future generations. A few months ago, a reporter asked me, well, what would you like people to say about you after you're gone? And I was absolutely stunned when he asked me that question. And I said, well, once I'm dead, I don't give a shit what people say about me. I'm going to be dead. But I would like it very much if a few ideas that I leave will still be discussed and pondered. While I'm still kicking, I can offer a gift without any hidden agenda of money, fame, or power. I can speak as an elder the truth that comes from the heart. So I offer my legacy today and a few ideas in the hopes that it will not only prompt some questions in your minds, but that you will think of your legacy, even the young people that are here today. You have to ask, what's life all about? What matters most to me? What brings me joy and happiness? What do I want my legacy to be? I'm a geneticist, and one of the most remarkable things that I've seen during my lifetime, my career as a scientist, has been the accumulation of techniques to manipulate DNA, the genetic material. And at the turn of the millennium, geneticists announced an absolutely remarkable achievement, the complete delineation of the 3 billion letters in the nucleus of a human cell. The Human Genome Project was a stunning achievement, and out of that accomplishment came the most amazing insight that 99% of the genes in every one of our nuclei are identical to the genes in chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are our nearest relatives, that we each carry tens of thousands of genes identical to the genes in our pet dogs and cats, in eagles, salmon, in fruit flies and dandelions and cedar trees. All of life is our biological kin. They are our relatives because we share a common evolutionary history. And if other species are our relatives, then surely we treat them with greater respect and care than if we simply regard them as resources, as weeds or as vermin or pests. And in an act of great generosity, that web of our relatives delivers the most fundamental needs that we as an animal have. They deliver, they create, they cleanse and replenish our fundamental biological needs. It was plants that created the oxygen-rich atmosphere that animals like us depend on. Before there were any plants on Earth, there was no oxygen in the air because oxygen is a highly reactive element. It reacts chemically immediately if it's released. It was only photosynthesis that resulted in the release of large amounts of oxygen over millions of years and created the oxygen-rich atmosphere that we depend on today. The problem with climate today is that because of our burning of fossil fuels in such quantities, we are overwhelming all of the green things in the oceans and on land, their ability to absorb the carbon that we release. And it's accumulating like a blanket around the Earth, trapping heat and warming the planet. Life is a critical part of the hydrologic cycle. One of the first science lessons I had in school was the hydrologic cycle. Water evaporates, forms clouds, rains on the land, runs into rivers and lakes. Water cartwheels around the planet. And as it falls to the earth, then plant roots, tree roots, soil fungi, and bacteria filter that water. They are a critical part of the hydrologic cycle, delivering water for an animal like us to drink. Life is every bit of our food, and life creates the very soil on which we grow the plants that we consume. And all of the energy in our bodies, the energy that we need to grow, move, and reproduce, and all of the fuel that we depend on, the dung, the wood, the peat, the coal, the oil, and the gas, all of that is sunlight captured by plants. So the point is that the web of living things around the earth that we now know are our relatives, what scientists call biodiversity, delivers the most fundamental things that we as animals need to survive and flourish. We boast that we're intelligent. Oh, we're a clever animal. But what intelligent creature, knowing then the role that air, water, soil, photosynthesis, and biodiversity play in keeping us alive and healthy, would proceed to deliberately and so thoughtlessly pour our most toxic chemical wastes onto them, destroy ecosystems and habitat, and drive hundreds of thousands of species to extinction as if it's our right and as if it won't affect us. Scientists can also use DNA in very clever ways to trace the history of our movement over time. They can follow the path that we've taken over centuries and millennia, and all of the trails lead back to Africa 150,000 years ago. I can't wait to be invited by the Ku Klux Klan in the southern U.S. to tell these pointy-headed characters that we're all Africans. That's where we were born. Try to imagine what the world was like at the very moment our species appeared on Earth. There were still woolly mammoths on the planet, saber-toothed tigers, giant sloths all over North America, and moa birds in New Zealand. The world was a very different place. And if we were to take a time machine and go back 150,000 years and park above the Rift Valley, we would see animals in abundance and variety beyond anything that we could see in Africa today. And we would have to look very carefully to spot among these animals these little clusters of 3, 4, and 5 of these two-legged furless apes. And that was us. Now, you got to admit, when you look at it in that context, we weren't very impressive. I'm sure 150,000 years ago that none of the other animals trembled when they saw us and whispered, "Man, watch out for those naked apes. They're going to take over the planet." I mean, no one would have imagined that fate for our species. There weren't very many of us. We weren't very big. We weren't very fast. An elephant can outrun the fastest human on Earth. We weren't very strong. A chimpanzee weighing 100 pounds could whip my ass, and I suspect every one of you in this room, well, maybe not Don Henry, but most of us. And certainly we weren't endowed with any special sensory ability of vision or hearing. You have to ask, what did we have going for us? And of course, the answer was that our secret was hidden. It was a 2-kilogram organ buried deep in our skulls, the human brain, more than compensated for our lack of physical and sensory ability. That brain endowed us with a massive memory. No other mammal on Earth has the memory capacity of a human brain. We were curious, and we were very, very inventive. And those qualities of memory, curiosity, and inventiveness more than compensated for our lack of physical and sensory ability. That brain remembered from experience. It learned by observation and trial and error, and it created new ideas. That brain was aware of itself, and aware of itself in space and time, as no other species is today. And it applied ideas that it gained through observation and experience. That brain enabled us to dream of a world yet to come, A world, a future in which we could avoid the dangers and exploit the opportunities. Foresight, I believe, was our great leg up. By looking ahead, we could imagine the future and then work towards achieving it. And in only 150 millennia, we have occupied every continent and become the dominant animal on the planet. Just consider our numbers. 10,000 years ago, at the very beginning of the agricultural revolution, there were only 10 million of us on the entire planet. But with the agricultural revolution, our numbers exploded in only 8,000 years. When it's thought that Jesus Christ was born, there were now 100 million human beings. And then in less than 2,000 years, by the early 1800s, we achieved the first 1 billion people on Earth. And in less than 200 years, we had reached 6.9 billion of us in 2010. We are now the most numerous mammalian species on the planet. And this violates a simple biological principle that the numbers of any given species are inversely related to our size, our physical size. In other words, the smaller you are, the more of you there can be. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Tiny animal doesn't need a lot of space and stuff, so you can have a much larger number than an animal like a rabbit or a deer. By the time you get to a whale or an elephant, a species would number in the tens of thousands. So there's an inverse relationship between physical size and numbers. But humans, we're not a huge animal, but we're not a small creature. We have now violated that biological principle. We have become the most numerous mammal on Earth, and of course the reason is that we have technology and we have trade that has enabled us to increase so dramatically. So just the act of staying alive, since there are so many of us, each of us has to breathe the air, drink the water, eat food, clothe, and shelter ourselves. Just the simple act of living for 6.9 billion human beings means we have a very heavy ecological footprint. It takes a lot of air, water, and land to keep us alive. But of course, we're not like mice or rats or rabbits. We have an enormous amount of technology used on our behalf, and we're not even aware of it. I look around this room, there's no one here running around naked because we're wearing clothes, but I doubt that any of you is growing cotton or wool in your backyards. All of our clothing is delivered to us through a vast amount of technology. And then, of course, you think of the food that we consume, and you think of the computers in our homes and our televisions and cars. All of that represents technology used on our behalf that amplifies our ecological footprint beyond anything that any other species that has ever existed. But it doesn't end there. Ever since the end of World War II, we've been afflicted with an incredible appetite for stuff. We love to shop. And all of the stuff that we consume comes out of the earth. And when we're finished with it, it goes back into the earth. And we have a global economy that exploits the entire planet as a source of raw materials and uses the whole earth to dump its toxic materials and wastes back into it. And the global economy hides the consequences of this use of the entire planet. If you go to a store to buy a cotton shirt, I suspect very few of you ask, is this organic or not? Cotton is one of the most chemically intensive crops that we grow. And if you look at the experience in the Soviet Union, where they turned Asia into the biggest cotton-growing area on the planet, it has been an absolute ecological disaster. But we don't ask, where was this cotton grown? What about the effect on local ecosystems? What about the people that have to harvest the cotton? Are they getting a decent wage? We don't ask any of those questions. We just want a cotton shirt, buy it, put it on, and that's it. And then you think of our cars and computers and television sets. There are a lot of metals in these products. Mining is one of our most destructive activities. Do we ever ask, gee, where are the metals in this car mined? And what is the ecological impact of that mining? And what about the effect on the miners? Are they getting a decent wage? Are they in danger? Are they poisoned? We don't ask any of that. We just want the product and we want to use it. But the very act of paying money and purchasing that product has repercussions that extend around the world. So when we add these things all together, our numbers, our technological muscle power, our consumptive appetite, and a global economy, we have become a new kind of force on the planet. We have become a geological force. The Nobel Prize winner, well, let me say that we generally divide the history of the planet up into different epochs. These are geological states of the planet, the Holocene, the Eocene, Miocene, Pleistocene, and so on. And the Nobel Prize winner Paul Crutzen said a few years ago, this should be called the Anthropocene Epoch, the time when one species, human beings, have become a geological force. We are altering the chemistry, the physics, and the biology of the planet on a massive scale. It wasn't long ago when we referred to tornadoes and floods and drought and hurricanes and forest fires as natural disasters or acts of God. But they aren't anymore. The human imprint is built into these events. They are no longer natural. And we have taken the place of God's in being a part of the occurrence of these events without God's knowledge to be able to manage the impact of what we're doing. And now, scientists and supercomputers, acting in the best tradition of our species, looking ahead and looking to see where the dangers and the opportunities lie. For over 40 years, the leading scientists of the world have been telling us we're headed down a very dangerous path, that there are opportunities by changing our road. And yet now we are turning our backs on the very strategy that got us here to this point. Looking ahead, using our experience and knowledge, avoiding danger and exploiting opportunities. Today we find many people who are incapable of understanding, who don't believe that human beings could become so powerful that we could actually affect the chemistry of the atmosphere and determine and cause the climate to change. They just don't believe we're that powerful. And if we're going to come to grips with how powerful we've become, then we have to see the way the world is and where we belong in it. And that, to me, is the biggest challenge we face today. You see, we all have this, we're one species. We all share the same eyes, the same neurons, the same brain. But when we look out at events that occur, what we see is radically different from person to person, because the brain actively edits the information coming in from our sense organs to make sense of it in a brain that has developed over time through experiences, that through our gender, our religion, our socioeconomic class. All of those things affect the way that brain sees the world. Now, that may seem like a weird thing, but the reality is each of us looks out and we often see radically different things. Simple way to show yourself this. Take a group of men, take a group of women in different rooms, and just begin to talk to them about family, about love, about sex, about babies, and by God, you'd swear they came from different planets. It's amazing we can reproduce it all. Take a street person on Wall Street and a banker on Wall Street and talk about the economy and welfare and money, and again, they come from different planets. Ask a Palestinian and an Israeli about Gaza, and you will get radically different responses. We see the world through perceptual lenses that are shaped by our background, experiences, beliefs, and values. A few years ago, I went to a small village on the side of an Andes mountain in Peru. And I learned that the villagers there teach their children that that mountain is an Apu. An Apu in their language means God. And as long as that Apu casts its shadow on the village, it will determine the fate of everyone in that village. Now imagine how those kids, when they grow up, treat that mountain compared to a kid in Kimberley who's taught those mountains are filled with silver and gold. The way we see the world shapes the way that we treat that world. Is a forest a sacred grove, or is it just lumber and pulp? Is a river the veins of the land, or simply an opportunity for power and irrigation? Is another species our biological kin, or just a resource and an opportunity? Is our house our home, or a piece of real estate? You see, the way that we view the world is radically shaped by our attitude or the way we see it. And something has happened fundamentally to change our perceptions over the last century. You see, for 99% of human existence, we were a local tribal animal. We may have traveled a total of a few hundred kilometers in a lifetime, have come to know maybe 100 or 200 people in a lifetime. We didn't worry about whether there were human beings on the other side of an ocean, over a mountain, or across a desert. We only had to worry about our local tribal territory and our tribe. And maybe a few tribes that raided us for women or fought with us. But basically, we were a local tribal animal. In 1900, when there were only 1.5 billion people on the planet, there were only 16 cities with more than 1 million people. London was the largest with 6.5 million people. In Australia, I'm sure in 1900 there wasn't a single city with 1 million people. The vast majority of people around the world lived in rural village communities. The vast majority of people were involved in some aspect of agriculture. We were a farming species. And farmers know very well that weather and climate are absolutely essential in determining how well you do through the year. In Canada, farmers know the amount of moisture in the soil is directly related to the amount of snow that we get in the winter. Farmers know that you need insects to pollinate flowering plants. They know that certain species of plants can take nitrogen from the air and fix it as fertilizer in the soil. I believe farmers understand that we are deeply embedded in the natural world and dependent on it. Cut ahead only 100 years to the year 2000. Now there are 4 times as many people on the planet, 6 billion people, but there are more than 400 cities with more than 1 million people. Tokyo is the largest city with 26 million people. Can you imagine? Going from, in 1900, Tokyo was the 7th largest city with 1.5 million people. In only 100 years, they went from 1.5 million to 26 million people. If you've ever been to Tokyo, I just came back from there last week, you know people shouldn't live that way. We weren't meant to live in a big city like that. But now, the vast majority of people in the industrialized world, 85% in Canada and Australia, live in big cities. And in a big city, our perspective changes completely. We now feel that we're not like other species. We're so smart, we create our own habitat. And as long as we've got a few parks out there where we can go camping and go out and play, who needs nature? In a city, I have a friend in Toronto who lives on the outskirts of the biggest city in Canada, and he lives in a high-rise apartment that's completely air-conditioned. In the morning, he goes down the elevator into the basement, gets into his air-conditioned car, drives down the freeway to the center of Toronto, goes into the basement of a commercial building, up into his office. The entire building is air-conditioned. That building is connected through a whole network of tunnels to all kinds of shopping centers and food courts. He doesn't have to go outside for weeks on end. We now live in a habitat where our highest priority is our job. I mean, you need a job in order to make money to buy the things that you want. And so, as urban animals now, nature now has become something far more removed from our lives, and we perceive the economy as our greatest priority. We forget then that the most important thing to remember is we are animals. And boy, I gave a talk in Austin, Texas a few years ago, and there were some kids in the front row, and I said, now if you remember one thing I say today, when you go home, just remember we are animals. Man, did their parents get pissed off at me. Don't you dare call my Mary, she's an animal. We're human beings. You know, we resent that. I mean, look at the way if you call someone a chicken or a pig or a snake or an ape, it's an insult, right? I walked into a store in Calgary, Alberta, and there was a big sign on the front that said, no animals allowed. I said, man, if you enforce that, you're not going to have any customers. But no, we don't think of ourselves as animals. And we are defined by our most fundamental needs that come, as Aboriginal people tell us, that come from Mother Earth. The earth is our mother. It gives birth to us because we need earth, air, fire, and water. And we don't remember that. When every one of us left our mother's body, the absolute first thing we needed was a breath of air. That first breath inflated our lungs and allowed us to announce we have arrived on this planet. And from that moment on to the last breath you take before you die, we need air 15 to 40 times a minute, and we don't even think about it. Well, maybe if you thought about it all the time, you wouldn't be able to do anything else. But I want you for the next minute or so to think about that simple act. 2 to 3 liters of air deep down into that moist, warm, intimate part of my body, our lungs. If you've ever seen a fresh pair of lungs in an animal that's been slaughtered and touched it, you know, it's that kind of mushy, squishy, it's a funny feeling. And the reason for that is our lungs are primarily made up of air. Our lungs have an average of 300 million capsules or alveoli. They're clustered like grapes around an alveolar duct, and we need 300 million to give the surface area to come into contact with the air. If you flattened out the alveoli in 2 dimensions, they would cover a tennis court. That's how much surface is all crumpled up in these alveoli in our lungs. And each alveolus is lined with a 3-layered membrane called a surfactant. The surfactant reduces surface tension, so when the air comes into contact with it, it sticks. And right away, carbon dioxide rushes out of our bodies, oxygen and whatever else is in the air rushes into our bodies, hemoglobin molecules in red blood cells grab onto the oxygen, and with each beat of our heart, that oxygen is pumped to every part of our bodies. And when we breathe out, we don't exhaust all the air in our lungs. If we did that, our lungs would collapse. About half of the air stays in your lungs even when you exhale. So the point I'm trying to make is that you can't draw a line and say air ends there and we begin there. There is no line. It's in us, it's stuck to us, and it's circulating throughout our bodies. We are air. We have made a mistake as environmentalists saying, well, it's the environment out there and we're here and we've got to regulate our interaction with it. Absolutely incorrect. There is no separation. We are the air. And when I breathe out of my nose through convection, that air very quickly mixes in this room and goes straight up your nose. Now, when I say this to kids, I can see some go, oh, yeah. Yeah. I guess they think they've got a bubble of air that's only theirs. And if I am air and you are air, then I am you. We are embedded in this thin matrix of air around the planet. Not only with all the human beings on Earth, we're embedded with the trees and the birds and the worms and the snakes that are all using that same sacred element, that air. Years ago, the American astronomer Harlow Shapley once asked, what happens to one breath of air? Well, how do you follow a breath of air? 98% of the air is oxygen and nitrogen. You breathe it in, oxygen and nitrogen go into your bodies. We need the air for the oxygen, so when you breathe it out, a lot of the oxygen never comes back out. 80% of the air is nitrogen. Some of it reacts biochemically in your body and doesn't come back out. But 1% of the air is an element called argon. Argon belongs to a class of elements that are called the noble gases, or they're inert gases. They don't react chemically with anything. So you breathe it in, goes into your body, breathe it out, comes right back out. So argon is a good, what scientists call marker, indicator for that breath of air. It's 1% of the air. How many atoms of argon in one breath of air? Shapley calculates 3 followed by 18 zeros. That's 3 billion argon atoms in one breath of air. So let's follow one breath that comes out of Don Henry's nose there. Within minutes, every one of us is breathing gazillions of argon atoms from that one breath that Don took. But of course, the doors are open, out that breath goes, and eventually, over time, it will diffuse across Melbourne, across Australia. And according to Shapley, 1 year later, no matter where you are on the planet, because the air is a single system, every breath you take will have about 15 argon atoms from that one original breath that Don took in Melbourne a year before. So on that basis, Shapley calculates every breath you take has millions of argon atoms that were once in the bodies of Joan of Arc and Jesus Christ. That every breath you take has millions of argon atoms that were in the bodies of dinosaurs 65 million years ago. That every breath you take will suffuse life forms as far as we can see into the future. We breathe out carbon dioxide in that breath, and a year later, every plant, leaf, and needle will have carbon atoms that came from that one original breath a year before. We breathe out nitrogen, and that nitrogen then enters into the nitrogen cycle that will enter in the soil and circulate around the planet. Air is this incredible substance then that links us with all life on earth, that connects us from the past through the present and into the future. Surely then, air should be regarded as a sacred substance, as Aboriginal people do all around the world. Yet we boast that being intelligent, it allows us to proceed to use this sacred element, air, as a dump for our most toxic chemicals, as if it won't have any implications for us. We are air. Whatever we do to the air, we do directly to ourselves. And that's the case for the other elements, the sacred elements. We are water. Every one of us is at least 60% water by weight. We're basically a big blob of water with enough organic thickener added, we don't dribble away on the floor. And the problem, of course, is that our bodies leak water. It comes out of our skin and our eyes and our mouth and our crotch, and we lose water all the time. When you top up with a glass of water, do you think that water is Melbourne water? I mean, the hydrologic cycle ensures that water circulates around the planet. And every bit of water you do drink has molecules that have come from all of the oceans of the world, off the canopies of the Amazon forest, off the steppes of Russia. We are water, and whatever we do to the water, we do directly to ourselves. We are the earth, because every bit of the food that we eat for our nutrition was once alive. And most of it was plant material, and that grows on the earth. Indeed, it is life that creates the soil on which we grow our plants. We are the earth through the food we eat for our nutrition, and again, we spread our most toxic chemicals into the soil from which we grow our food. And we are fire, because every bit of the energy in our bodies that we need to grow, move, and reproduce is sunlight captured by plants through photosynthesis, converted into chemical energy. We then consume that by eating the plants or eating the animals that eat the plants, and we store it in our bodies. And when we want that energy back out, we burn those molecules and release the energy of the sun back out into our bodies. So we are earth, air, fire, and water that come from Mother Earth. Those are our most fundamental needs, yet we use them without a thought. Where does that take us, knowing these are the sacred elements for our lives? Economics and ecology come from the same root word, the Greek word ekos, meaning household or domain. Ecology is the study of home. Economics is the management of home. What ecologists try to do is to determine what are the ground rules, what are the conditions and the principles that enable a species to survive and flourish. Not a bad bit of information. I would have thought that any group of people of human beings, of corporations or governments, before beginning a new program would say, oh, wait a minute now, before we do anything, what were those ecologists telling us were those principles and conditions? Because whatever we do should not in any way violate those principles and conditions. But what do? We think we're so smart that we elevate economics above ecology. And in Canada, we've had, there have been the three amigos, Bush, Howard, and Harper. Well, two of the three amigos are gone, but Canada is stuck with the third amigo who's still carrying on with the Bush-Howard tradition, and he says, we can't do anything about climate, it'll destroy the economy. So he has elevated the economy above the very atmosphere that keeps us alive. A former minister of Alberta, which is our energy province, like Texas, he said, these damned environmentalists better understand we can't afford to do what they're talking about and demanding us to do unless the economy is strong and growing. So even the minister whose job is to protect the environment thinks the economy is the source of everything that matters. And as long as the economy is fine, we can afford to do the other important things. Let's put the eco back into economics. They've forgotten about that. I'm told over and over again by politicians and business people, listen, Suzuki, you've got to be realistic. The economy is the bottom line. That's why this past summer I did a 10-part series for radio called The Bottom Line. Because as a scientist, I know there's a radically different bottom line from the one our politicians and business people seem to cling to. You see, we live in a world that is constrained by laws of physics. The first and second law of thermodynamics tells us we cannot build a perpetual motion machine. We live on a planet in which gravity determines how we live. We can't have an anti-gravity machine. We live with the reality that we can't build a rocket traveling faster than the speed of light. These are forces of nature. We understand that, and we live with it. In chemistry, there are laws and principles that determine what kind of chemical reactions you can have. There are diffusion constants and reaction rates that constrain what we can do in the field of chemistry. And in biology, we know that all life depends on the biosphere. That's the zone of air, water, and land where all life exists. That we need air, water, soil, and sunlight through photosynthesis that keeps us alive. Those, you can't deny those realities. Those are facts or forces of nature. Other things, capitalism, free enterprise, the economy, currency, markets, these are not forces of nature, for heaven's sakes. We invented them. It just strikes me as crazy to raise them up and act as if somehow they are sacrosanct. It's really interesting to interview someone who's a neocon, you know, one of these radical right-wing corporate folks, anyway, an economist. You talk to them and they seem to be perfectly normal, and then you say, the market. And my God, oh, the market! Oh, the market, yes, free the market. As long as the market's free, everything will be fine. Wait a minute now. The market is a human invention. What the hell are you down there praying before the free market, for heaven's sakes? This is absurd. You know, it wasn't long ago that people believed in demons and dragons and monsters, and they really believed in them. I mean, if we thought they were mad at us, we would sacrifice gold and jewels. We'd do anything to keep them off our backs. Well, we know those were figments of our imagination. Nobody believes in them today. But what do? We replace them with another figment of our imagination, the economy. Just read the headlines in the business pages. Economy's looking pretty sick today. You know, I have this idea of the economy lying back with a thermometer in its nose and an ice pack on its head. What are you talking about? The economy isn't a thing out there. We invented it. You know, and we get opportunities to do something about it. We can change the economy. We can't change the laws of nature, but we can certainly change these human constructs. 2008 was an incredible opportunity. Yes, it was a crisis. But what an opportunity to sit down and say, hey, we can't keep going through these cycles of dot-com booms and bust and housing booms and bust. We've got to do something else. But no, Mr. Bush and then Mr. Obama poured hundreds of billions of dollars into the very banks that created the problem, into the auto sector without any strings attached, and just said, please, please, please get back up and running and get everything back to normality. Wait a minute now. We don't want it back normal. There's something wrong with the system. Wasn't it Einstein that said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result? The hell's going on? We invented these things, and they have become very, very destructive, and we've got to change them because they don't make sense. We compound the problem of economics by elevating other human constructs into this position of being sacrosanct. We draw lines around our property, around our cities, around our states, around our countries, and boy, do we take those borders seriously. We'll go to war, we'll kill people, we'll die to protect those boundaries. But guess what? Nature doesn't care at all about the boundaries we draw anywhere. And yet, boy, do we think that everything can be managed through the perspective of our boundaries. Well, you know, I was in Alberta a few weeks ago. I told the Albertans, if in fact you have only Alberta air, I don't care what you do with the tar sands. You develop the hell out of these, the most dangerous, dirty oil that we can get. But you know what? The air isn't yours. The air that you produce or you use is air that belongs to the whole planet. So your boundaries don't mean a damn thing. Think of water. Water doesn't pay attention to borders. We get dust that blows over from Africa onto North America. And then you think of the migrating birds and the fish and the mammals and the insects. They don't care about human boundaries. Look what happens then. We go to Copenhagen in December of last year, 192 countries, all negotiating with something that doesn't give a shit about our boundaries, and we're trying to look at it through the boundaries of our countries, and then we say, yeah, but there are economic considerations. Australia's got to have our coal, so we can't negotiate that away. We use our political borders and our economic systems to ensure we will never be able to deal as a single species with this crisis of climate change. We have an economic system that is so out of sync with the reality of nature, and yet we try to constantly shoehorn nature into our economic priorities. Every time in Canada, I'm sure Australia is different. I know that your economy wasn't nearly as bad as the American economy in 2000 and all that stuff. But in Canada, whenever there's an economic downturn, the first thing, we have a law in Canada that you cannot ship raw logs out of the country. We have to add the value to the logs before we ship them out of the country. The minute there's an economic downturn, the government says to the forest industry, you can cut as many trees as you want and ship them raw because we need that revenue. So we ask nature to pay the price for our economic downturn. We say the same thing to the fishers. You know, oh yeah, well I know that there are maximum sustainable yields, but we'll increase your catch this year because of the economic downturn. Or this chemical plant that's polluting the river, we'll forget about the pollution controls now because that's too expensive in a time of economic recession. So we always ask nature to pay the price for our economic problems. An economy is made possible, only exists because of the biosphere. The biosphere allows us to extract resources, allows us to throw away our wastes and toxic material. Yet the economic system ignores or discounts the many services performed by nature in that biosphere. In British Columbia, I fought for years against the lunatic policy of clear-cutting forests. And in the 1980s, Ruby Dunstan, the chief of the Lytton Indian Band, came to me and asked if I would help her fight against logging in the Lytton Indians' Sacred Valley. The British Columbia government had given a New Zealand forest company, Fletcher Challenge, a permit to log the Stein Valley. And the native people did not want that because it was sacred. So I said, okay, I'll try to do that. And right away, she took me and flew me in a helicopter up the valley to show me what we were fighting for. And as we flew up the valley, she pointed out the sacred burial sites on the cliffs over the river, the Stein River. She pointed out all of the bushes where the grizzly bears and people go to gather berries in the summer. She showed me where the spawning gravels were for the salmon, and a site where her people 200 years ago had fought a neighboring tribe in a major battle. And when we took the helicopter and landed it, the pilot came out of the helicopter, and he shook his head. So he said, it's amazing. Last week I took a group of forest company executives and politicians up the valley the same way I went, and all they talked about were board feet, volume of pulp, jobs, and profit. Two groups of people flying over exactly the same valley and seeing fundamentally different things. I once had a confrontation with the CEO of a major forest company in British Columbia, who, in his frustration, he said, okay, are you tree huggers like you willing to pay for those trees? You don't want us to cut them down. You want to pay for those trees? Because if you're not willing to pay for them, they don't have any value until someone cuts them down. And that, for me, was a great epiphany, because I realized he was absolutely right. In our economic system, unless money is involved in the way that we deal with the forest, they don't have any economic value. You see, as long as the forest is intact and standing, all of the green things in a forest are taking carbon dioxide and putting oxygen back in it. Not a bad service for an animal like us. If plants weren't doing that, we wouldn't be around. But you know what economists call that? An externality. I didn't know that was a fancy economic term, but apparently what it means is it's not in the economy. We don't care about that. You got to ask, what the hell is this economy for? It's not the earth that I belong to. Where is this economy designed for? Economists externalize this service that nature performs. Those trees are pumping millions of gallons of water out of the earth and transpiring it into the air to modulate weather and climate. That's an externality. That forest is providing pollinators that pollinate flowering plants all around. That's an externality. The trees are holding the soil so when it rains it doesn't run into the salmon spawning beds and spoil the spawning. That's an externality. So you see, the forest is performing all kinds of services that keep the planet rich and habitable for an animal like us. But in our economic system, those services have no value. If that isn't a form of insanity, I don't know what is. This economic system is so fundamentally disconnected from the real world that it is inevitably destructive. Perhaps nothing is more destructive in that economic system in the way that we have enshrined growth as our highest priority. The growth in the economy is the very definition of progress. Ask any politician or business person, how well did you do last year? And within a second, they'll be talking about the GDP, they'll be talking about the economy, jobs, market share, or profit, and whether or not they grew. That is the definition of whether they succeeded or failed. But wait a minute now, growth. Growth is nothing. We can't use growth. Growth isn't a benefit for us. Growth is just a description of a state. The state of a system. It's not something that is the end of what we're aiming for. Growth doesn't do anything for us. So it's kind of crazy to me that we've equated growth, period, as the definition of progress. And nobody wants to impede progress. And so we all want to support progress, but if growth is the definition of progress, we never ask the important questions. What is an economy for? Are there no limits? How much is enough? Are we happier with all this stuff? We don't ask those questions. We're just blindly following the demand for growth. Wait a minute now. We live in the finite world. We live in a world defined by the air, water, and soil in that thin layer of the biosphere. Carl Sagan, the late astronomer, said that if you reduce the Earth to the size of a basketball, the biosphere, the zone of air, water, and land where 30 million species live would be thinner than a layer of varnish that you paint on that basketball. And that's it. It's fixed. It can't grow. And yet economists and politicians think that the economy can grow forever. It cannot. They think it must grow forever because the definition of progress is growth. Each of us is made up of about 100 trillion cells. That's a 1 followed by 14 zeros. That's a lot of cells. Now, if one cell out of 100 trillion cells, one cell in 100 trillion is nothing. But if one cell decides, I'm going to grow forever, I mean, screw it, I'm just going to keep growing. Before it's any significant mass, if we don't get rid of it, it'll kill us. And yet economists and cancer cells think they can grow forever. This is the end result of steady growth, is death. I'm going to show you why this clinging to the notion of steady growth is suicidal. Anything growing steadily over time is called exponential growth. And anything growing exponentially has a very predictable doubling time. So if it's the size of your city, the population of Australia, the population of the world, the amount of water you use, the amount of garbage you make, anything growing steadily over time will have a predictable doubling time. If it's growing at 1% a year, it will double in 70 years. 2% a year, it'll double in 35 years. 3% in 24 years. 4% in 17 and a half years. Anything growing steadily will double in a predictable time. I'm going to give you a system analogous to the planet. It's a test tube full of food for bacteria. So the test tube and the food is the world, the planet. And I'm going to drop one bacterial cell into that. And that bacterial cell is us. And it's going to start to divide every minute. That's exponential growth. So we drop the cell in at time 0. At the beginning, there's one cell. 1 minute, there are 2. 2 minutes, there are 4. 3 minutes, there are 8. 4 minutes, 16. That's exponential growth. And at 60 minutes, the test tube is completely packed with bacteria, and there's no food left. Okay, so it's a 60-minute growth cycle. When is the test tube only half full? And of course, the answer is at 59 minutes. 59 minutes, it's only half full. 1 minute later, it'll be completely full. So at 58 minutes, it's 25% full. At 57 minutes, it's 12.5% full. At 55 minutes of a 60-minute cycle, it's 3% full. So if at 55 minutes, one of the bacteria says, hey guys, we got a population problem. The other bacteria would say, Jack, what the hell have you been smoking, man? 97% of the test tube's empty, and we've been around for 55 minutes. And they'd be 5 minutes away from filling it. So bacteria are no smarter than people. At 59 minutes, they go, oh my God, Jack was right. We got 1 minute left. What the hell are we going to do now? Let's don't give any money to those damn economists. Give it to those scientists. And by God, in less than a minute, they invent 3 test tubes full of food for bacteria. So they've quadrupled the amount of food in space. It would be like us discovering 3 more planet Earths right nearby that we could begin to use right away. So they're saved, right? So what happens? At 60 minutes, the first test tube's full. 61 minutes, the second's full. 62 minutes, all 4 are full. By quadrupling the amount of food in space, you buy 2 extra minutes. How can we add even a fraction of 1% more of air, water, soil, or biodiversity? It's fixed. It's that thin layer of varnish around the basketball. It's fixed. And every scientist I've talked to agrees with me. We're already past the 59th minute. So all of this talk about we've got to have more, we've got to keep growing, says that we've got to accelerate what is a suicidal path. Now, when I say this to business people and politicians, they get very, very angry with me. How dare you say we're past the 59th minute? Look at our stores. Look at Melbourne, this wonderful city. We're living longer. We're healthier. How dare you say we're past the 59th minute? I say it without apology. We are creating the illusion that everything is all right, but we're using up the rightful legacy of our children and grandchildren. We are using up our basic natural capital, all in the interest of keeping that economy growing. You don't have to believe me. Talk to any elder who's lived in Melbourne for 80 or 90 years. Just ask them, what was it like here when you were a kid? Yeah, there are cars and fridges and all that stuff. What was the river like? What did the Yarra like when you were a kid, 80 or 85 years ago? I've been to the Amazon. I've been to the Serengeti and the Arctic. And when I talk to the oldest person I can find, I ask them, what was it like here when you were 5 or 6 years old? And everywhere the answer is the same. It used to be so different. There used to be trees, not in the Arctic, but other places. There used to be trees as far as you could see. The air used to be black with birds at certain times of the year. The rivers used to be jammed with fish all over the world. Our elders are a living record of enormous changes that have happened in the span of a single life. My American friends say, well, there's plenty more where that came from. You know, the planet has been fully occupied and fully developed by 30 million species for hundreds of thousands of years. If we drive a plant or an animal out of existence around here, there's not empty space for them to go and occupy. If they're not here, they're not anywhere. Well, Americans say that's the price of progress. I don't think it's progress to use up the rightful legacy of our children and grandchildren. I was born in Vancouver. When I was a boy, I remember my dad taking me in a rowboat around Stanley Park, which is right in the center of Vancouver, and we would catch sea-run cutthroat trout. We'd go off Spanish Banks, the most popular beach in Vancouver, and jig for halibut, or go down to the mouth of the Fraser River and catch sturgeon anytime. Today, my grandchildren always call begging me to take them fishing. Do you think I could take them fishing where I went as a boy? Of course not. There are no fish left. And that's happening all over the world, I am sure. In Melbourne, it's the same thing. The Yarra River is nothing like what it once was. And I know I've been in Brisbane and I've talked to people there. It's happening all over the world. And we know in our hearts that something is wrong. We know that. The media, unfortunately, focus on the economy. Boy, if some economist has a stomach ache and decides, man, we're going to go into a radical recession, right away there are headline news and television cameras. We're scared stiff. I hear your dollar, the Australian dollar, is on parity with the U.S. Hallelujah! I'll bet you've got all kinds of headlines. But when 25% of all plants may go extinct within the next 30 years, guess where that's found? Way back in the back pages, maybe in a column this big. Over and over again, we hear about endangered freshwater fishes, about the birds, about the mammals, that these are all endangered. But we bury them in the newspapers because we're so concerned about the economic recession or priorities. You know something's wrong. The oceans cover 71% of the earth. They are a mess. We've used them as garbage cans. In the Pacific Ocean, there are islands of plastic bigger than the state of Texas. There are dead zones where nothing can live, increasing in size, duration, and number in every ocean on the planet. And we know that scientists say if we continue on the path we're on, there will not be a single fish for human consumption left in the ocean by 2050. And now with the added carbon in the atmosphere, the carbon dissolves in the oceans as carbonic acid to acidify the oceans. We have no idea what the consequences of that will be. 80% of the forests have been invaded and are gone, and if we carry on as we are in 20 years, there will not be a single large intact forest left on the planet. We have used the air, water, and soil to dump our toxic chemicals. Every one of you is filled with dozens of toxic chemicals and more than a pound of plastic dissolved in your bodies. Climate change caused by our excessive use of fossil fuels has been known about. We've known the cause for over 20 years, and all that has happened since the first alarms began to be sounded in 1988 is that carbon emissions have simply skyrocketed in the last 20 years. So here we are. As a species, we've shown ourselves to be incredibly clever, but without the humility to recognize that there are limits and that we don't know enough to manage the entire biosphere. So now is the point I think we have to sit and ask, wait a minute now, what is life all about? My great hero and teacher and mentor was my father. And in 1994, when he was 85, he was dying. He knew he was dying, and he was completely prepared for it. He wasn't afraid. I moved in with him the last month of his life, and that is one of the happiest periods of my time with my father. We laughed and cried, and we looked over scrapbooks, and we talked and talked and talked. He kept saying, "David, I die a rich man." He didn't have a penny, but he kept saying, "I'm a rich man." And at night, my wife would come with our children and show slides of trips that we'd taken with my father. Never once in the last month of his life did he ever say, "Gee, David, you remember that closet full of fancy clothes I had?" He never once said, "You remember that 1995 car?" Well, 1985 car that I owned. "You remember that house I bought on Bruffdale Lane?" All we talked about were family, friends, and neighbors, and the things that we did together. That was my father's wealth. The experiences shared with people that mattered to him, and in that he was truly a wealthy man. We've got a very weird idea about what life is about and what makes us wealthy and happy. In the 1990s, before Hong Kong was going to revert to China, I got a letter in the mail from a real estate agent. My wife and I have lived in our house now for over 35 years. We live right on the water in Vancouver. It's a wonderful area. And I got a letter saying, "Offshore money is pouring into Vancouver. Now is a perfect time for you to sell your house and buy up." I had never heard the phrase "buy up" before. I didn't know you bought a house to make a home, but it's just an investment and you sell it to buy up. We thought of our house, our property, as our home. And I was very, very angry when I realized what they were talking about. And I thought, okay, if I was going to put my home on the market, what would I put down as the things that would make it of any value? And the first thing I put down was the fact that when we bought the house, my wife's mother and father then moved in to live with us. My children have known Grandma and Granddad upstairs all their entire lives. And I put that down as the highest value of that property. My father was a carpenter. When Tara and I were first married, he built a set of kitchen cabinets for our first apartment. And when we bought the house, I tore that cabinet out and installed it in our kitchen. Looked like hell in that house. But every time I used that kitchen cabinet, my father was there. I built a fence along the water side, and my best friend came out from Toronto and lived with us for a week. And he spent days carving a beautiful handle to go on the gate to that fence. And every time I open the gate, I think of my best friend, and I put that down. My father-in-law planted a beautiful clematis plant on the side of that gate. When my mother died, we put her ashes on it, and when my niece Janice died unexpectedly, we put her ashes on it. And every year when that beautiful purple flower appears on the clematis plant, I know that my mother and Janice are there, and I put that down. My children have over the years, they've dragged dead snakes and birds and squirrels off the street, and they have a little animal cemetery under our dogwood tree, and I put that down. And as I looked over that list of things, I realized that those are the things that make that house, that property, priceless for us because it's our home. But on the market, those things are worthless. And that's the problem that we face today. I think as well of Aboriginal people around the world who regard the earth itself as our mother and say that we are created out of the sacred elements where every rock and every forest, the soil and the rivers are sacred. And think of how we can put a price then on those things that are sacred. When we evaluate everything in economic terms, those things that are most worthwhile to us become meaningless and worthless. Somehow we've got into thinking that we need more and more to be happy, that we need bigger and better and newer stuff to make us happy. And I don't believe for a minute that that is what life is all about. So what then is the challenge for us at this moment? First of all, what's the hurry. We've got to slow down. We're all gonna die. So what the hell's the hurry? We're all gonna end up at the same place. And as we slow down, let's get to know each other. And let's start thinking about our ancestors and what we received from them, and think about what we're going to pass on to our children and grandchildren. And then I believe we have to get on with the most important thing. We have to get on with reimagining the future. That's what got us to this point. Our ability to look ahead and dream of a future where we could avoid danger and exploit opportunity. We have to reimagine that world so we know where we want to go. Imagine a world where we live, work, and play in the same place, the same area, so we don't need cars because we want to get out in the streets. That's where all the action is going on. Imagine a world where every building and road captures the sunlight that falls on it and converts it into electricity, where every roof captures water so that we can grow food on every roof. Imagine cities filled with orchards of fruit and nut trees and community gardens so we can celebrate the seasons as different crops become mature. Imagine extracting heat from the earth in the winter and putting heat back into the earth in the summer. Imagine cancer and asthma rates plummeting because we've stopped putting toxics into the air, water, and soil. Imagine zero production of industrial wastes because we design industrial systems like nature, where one organism's waste is another organism's opportunity. Imagine being able to drink the water out of any river or lake, as I did in Canada when I was a kid. In Canada today, when you catch a fish, you've got to consult a big book telling you what chemicals are in it and how much you can eat every week. Imagine a world where you could catch a fish and eat it without worrying about it. Imagine Australia with rich forests that you can log forever because you're doing it the right way. Imagine lighter than airships carrying huge supplies over vast distances, or carrying tourists that will float over the land at a leisurely pace. Imagine an economy that is in balance with nature's productivity and incorporates nature's services into it. I could go on and on. These are some of the possibilities. These are not pie-in-the-sky notions like carbon capture and sequestration. These are all actually being done and tried in different ways around the world. Let us dream of what is possible. And then let us show that, like our ancestors throughout time, once we have dreamed that future, we can put our energies into it and make it happen. Let me end with a quote from Goethe. Goethe said, "Until one is committed, there is great hesitance, the chance to draw back. The moment one definitely commits, then providence comes too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. Whatever you do or dream, you can begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Begin it now." Thank you. Well, I mean, I'm not an Australian. I just got here 2 days ago, and you want me to resolve this? I have no idea. But let me tell you one thing I would suggest. That unless we all come together on some level of agreement, then we're just going to bicker and bicker and bicker and lose this opportunity. We all have to agree that the health of the Murray-Darling River Basin, the watershed, is the source of our wealth and opportunity and happiness. Protecting that system has got to be our highest priority. And then we'll decide how we're going to allocate the use of that, but we've got to agree that that comes before any human demands put on it. And I think that's a hard sell.